Welcome to Out of Home Insider, the first podcast for media and marketing executives that connects how offline attention drives conversion. My name is Tim Rowe, and for the past 4 years, I've been interviewing guests about their unique insights in bridging this misunderstood and undervalued opportunity for brands to create alchemy in the real world. Did you know that the real world is more targeted than the internet? It's true. Because of privacy restrictions for ads online and the way that data is collected for offline purposes, the real world is now, and frankly always has been, more deterministically targeted than the internet. But how does it all work? And how do you communicate that same investment confidence to brands considering going offline for the first time? Why does GPS exist on cell phones? And where's the future of location marketing going, with more than 50% of the population using ad blockers or VPNs, and a cookieless future that's imminent, which is why today's guest is Dan Hight. Dan is the VP of Channel Partnerships for Placer AI, an audience intelligence platform that has built its foundation in commercial real estate, civic planning, and retail. Find out how the data and ad tech landscape has evolved to its current state and what's coming, and what that means for marketers, which is the big idea I'd like you to consider. How well do you know the history of what you do? Because to understand where you're going, you need to first understand where you came from. Without further ado, let's go.
Welcome, everybody, to the Out of Home Insider Show, a podcast like no other, hosted by the one and only Tim Rowe. Get ready to have some knowledge dropped on you and to be entertained, because nothing's more valuable than food for your brain. So sit back, relax, we're about to dive in as the best industry podcast is about to begin.
The global market for location-based marketing services was estimated to be worth about $46 billion in 2022, and it's anticipated to grow to $232 billion by 2030, or about 20 cents on the marketing dollar, being enabled largely by these cell phones in our pockets. But with ad blockers being used by almost 1 out of every 2 people, VPNs growing in popularity, a cookieless future, things obviously have to change, and they are changing daily. But to understand where we're going, we have to understand where we came from. So today we're going to explore why GPS exists in the first place, how the use case continues to morph for marketers and location-based marketing, and what the future could look like. Dan, thanks so much for being here.
Tim, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Maybe give folks a little bit of your origin story, some background on Dan. I see the great superheroes behind you, and superheroes all have great origin stories. So maybe give folks yours. Where do you come from, and what are we going to be talking about today?
Wow, that's a big story, Tim. I'm not sure we have time for all of that on the podcast, but I'll condense and give you the Cliff Note version. So I'm Dan Hight, Vice President of Channel Partnerships here at Placer. And we're a location analytics platform it's much broader than that. We're really providing true market intelligence for anything in the physical world, and that starts with commercial real estate to now advertising. We work with cities and municipalities, airports, you name it, kind of working with them. My background from a location perspective starts way back when I was at Nortel Networks, which built basically most of the technology that cell phone companies use today to communicate. So it was really the backbone of the internet, the backbone of cell phone communications. So I started to understand how the cell phone industry actually worked. And then from there, I went to Verizon. And Verizon at the time was a very large publication of Yellow Pages. That was my entry into the advertising ecosystem. Back when Google was just kind of starting out, and Yahoo was the number one search engine, and Microsoft had kind of their own platforms, which now have come kind of full circle in that world. That's where I first got my foray into advertising. And this was just the auspices of search. And then from there, went to XAD, which was a pioneer in kind of location-based, geo-targeted ad campaigns on mobile phones and building location-based audiences, and kind of saw, that whole rise of that entire industry, which then rebranded itself to Ground Truth. So that's when I first started to understand how location-based targeting technologies worked. There's a lot of different players that were in that space. And then from there, started doing some consulting in the space, spent a lot of time in the out-of-home ecosystem. I was on the board of the Digital Place-Based Advertising Association. Sure. That was the original location-based ad, if you will. I mean, these were boards on poles, and then place-based.
Signs on sticks in the ground,
Signs on sticks. I mean, that's what it was. And so there was no easier extension from a geofence campaign than somebody who inherently understood the value of a location-based ad. Broadcast radio or broadcast TV, a location to them was a DMA or a metro area. But right. Out of home certainly understood the value of location. It was all location, location, location. So it was a very easy complement to that. And so worked with a lot of companies kind of in that space. And then started doing some own consulting and advising on the side, did a lot of stuff in the out-of-home space. But then I worked for a company that was building the next generation of GPS. So my original foundation of understanding location-based technology from kind of an ad tech perspective, thought I knew a lot about location. I realized I was just scratching the surface of how location foundationally actually worked. This team put the very first GPS receiver ever on a cell phone. And so understanding the fundamentals of how the GPS technology works, how the chips within the phones work, how all the location ecosystem works. It got a, true, I would call it an ad tech anyway, version of a PhD of how location works. So now fully understand it. And, you kind of mentioned something in the beginning of like, we kind of take for granted. I took for granted before I even started. I was like, GPS just existed, on our phone.
Sure.
And
it gets
we
the
just
pizza
started
here.
Yeah, we just started seeing the evolution of some of that stuff. And I really stopped and thought, why does GPS actually even exist on our phone? Because without GPS on our phones, Placer couldn't do what we do. XAT couldn't have done what it did. Just any type of location ecosystem would, what Geopath does a lot for the industry with their partners. None of that could exist without having GPS. And I was like, well, why do we have GPS on our phones? Well, it was all because of 911. As people were moving from landlines to mobile phones, how are you going to find somebody when they need help? I don't think anyone really ever stopped to think about that.
Because the landline was registered to your home address, right?
And it was physically wired. So you called 911 and you couldn't speak or were having a life event or a safety event. You couldn't actually speak or communicate clearly. By that phone connection, they would know where you actually were. They could send help to people in distress. Now, fast forward when we start moving to cell phones. Well, it's not connected. If you can't tell them where you are, how do they actually find you? So the FCC mandated back in the early 90s and it actually rolled out in 1999 that cell phone manufacturers, the cell phone operating systems and the cell phone providers themselves all had to come together to support putting GPS receiver capabilities on a cell phone. And it was for public safety. And we just kind of took it for granted. And then once that capability was there, then you started to see a lot of new innovation started coming out. You started getting, mapping capabilities on your phone and GPS navigation, which most people just think of as that was always there. Well, it wasn't always there. And then you started seeing services that started coming out from that, from the Ubers and the DoorDashes of the world to location analytics. You kind of name it, kind of runs. And GPS today is responsible for, it's estimated over $1 trillion a year in kind of global impact for the U.S. So it's a dramatic shift, but the foundation of it was really around public safety. And you saw a lot of innovation that took off after that.
And how has that use case maybe evolved or changed over time? Are we using GPS? Like, do our phones use GPS all the time? Is it a some of the time feature? I guess maybe if we could double click into that, how does this all roll up to location-based marketing?
Yeah, well, I think foundation. I think most people just think of location as just GPS. Well, it's not just GPS. First of all, there's roughly 28 satellites that are used for commercial use for GPS.
28.
They're 28,
not 2,800.
No, 28. 28.
There's 28. More NFL teams than satellites.
And the reason why that is they're really high up in orbit. These things are in orbit, 12,500 miles in orbit. So they cover a very large geographic area of the Earth. But because they're so high up in orbit, they don't penetrate buildings. They don't work underground. There's a lot of challenges with it. It's unencrypted. That's why you can spoof your location. That's why VPNs come up and you can kind of, if you're trying to catch a Pokemon in, another country that is only available in Japan, you can spoof your location. Or unfortunately with some of the betting services on there where you can't do online gaming in one state, so you can spoof your location in another state. There's a lot of challenges with that are plaguing the online gaming industry. So GPS has a lot of capabilities, but your phone does more than just provide GPS. It uses other location services. And you're calling essentially the native operating system, either Android or iOS, to pull in the location services. GPS is one of those, but it also uses a lot of power. So the phones themselves use other sensors. It uses the accelerometer, the gyroscope, the compass to understand when you need to call for a new GPS position versus having GPS running every second of every day. It would drain your battery very, very quickly to do that. So ultimately, we're using a multitude of different location services on the device to determine where that phone actually is. And everybody does that. I mean, that's the foundation of how location generally works. And GPS, most people just think GPS, GPS is the most accurate thing. Well, GPS, generally speaking, and this is from the U.S. government itself, has accuracy of about 10 meters. Now, there's processes that people are using to improve that, but the actual GPS, is about 10 meters of accuracy. And it's getting better with new capabilities, and there is new standards that are being constantly deployed from a GPS perspective.
traditionally, and I suppose I'm using traditionally to mean the past 20 years of digital marketing primarily, we've looked at reaching audiences based on interest and intent. Thinking about a platform like Facebook or Meta, we're targeting people based on what they're interested in. If it's Google and paid search ads, we're trying to reach people based on their intent and what they're looking for. In the real world, behavior and movement become, I suppose, those two North Stars, the indicators of the audiences we're trying to reach. How do you think about that, or how do you start to make that transition as a digital marketer from interest and intent to behavior and movement? Now that we fundamentally understand.
In many ways, when you're out in the real world, you're doing your intent, right? I mean, if you're going to a quick serve restaurant, you're probably going there to
buy something,
get some fries. If you're going to a mall, you're probably going shopping to go get something. If you're going to, a concert, you're going to listen to whoever you're going to see. So you're actually doing your intent in many ways. And this was really kind of the auspice of a lot of, original location-based targeting tactics, right? In terms of building a location-based audience profile of where you're going in the real world. So I can understand who my luxury shoppers are. I can understand who my quick serve audience is. I can understand who my concert goers are. That was a very real thing. But you mentioned kind of in the opening, around privacy. The whole challenge is that starts to get into that creep factor, right? It's kind of it's like the Minority Report-ish. You kind of walk into something, I know exactly that's Tim that's walking in, and that might be fine for certain use cases, but it starts to get into who understands that. And that's one of the things that, from a Placer perspective, that we've really looked at from the very core of Placer with what our original intent was, which was, we focused initially on commercial real estate. So it was not so much that I'm trying to understand who Tim is specifically and where Tim is going. I just want to understand the number of people that are going into a certain location. So it's really trying to understand what is the right shopping tenant to go in a shopping center. So if I'm a CBRE or a JLL or a Cushman & Wakefield and I own the shopping center, who's the ideal tenant that I want to put in the shopping center? So it's more about what place is going to do well there versus who that person specifically is. And in many ways, that was kind of the bedrock of what Placer started with. And it was really kind of that aspect. And then I was working with retailers on building a new location or looking at acquiring a new location. Where should I go? What shopping center should I go? Or unfortunately, because of economic conditions, maybe they're looking at divesting a location. All things being equal, what stores should I divest? What competition has changed so I can look at my portfolio and better manage it? And then because of the privacy changes that you noted, again, we've been hearing about the death of third-party cookies for quite some time now, and a lot of ad tech companies have been preparing for the cookie apocalypse, as we've been talking about, and that seems to really be coming to fruition now. And whether it's from GDPR type regulations or CCPA, the aspects of privacy is going to get more stringent, not less stringent. There's also an awareness now that consumers have, and certainly Apple has been probably, at least from an ecosystem perspective, pushing that a lot more because they don't make advertising directly or money from advertising directly. It's more indirectly through the App Store, where Google, obviously, from a platform perspective, they're an advertising based company for the most part. But certainly consumers are more aware of it now, and kind of that creep factor. And I want people to really know that, not know that. And so now we have a lot of interest from an advertising perspective where I don't want to understand who that specific person is. And I'm looking more at kind of a cohort-based solution, or like what Google is doing, kind of a topic-based solution. So a one-to-many, a one-to-few, kind of the days of one-to-one in many cases are, from an advertising perspective, are kind of over, or certainly close to being over. You might use it from like a CRM perspective, where if you have a relationship with a brand and you kind of opted into that, great, the brand can do certain things. But, more mass market aspects are going to be much more one-to-many or one-to-few, which actually bodes very well for kind of the out-of-home industry in general, which has always been kind of a one-to-select, let's call it, one-to-many for certain ecosystems, one-to-few for others, and increasingly kind of the retail media ecosystem as well, again, which is not one-to-one, it's one-to-many.
I think what brands are seeing too from this over-optimization, the deprecation to targeting data and some of those feedback loops is that we're really missing out on the efficiency of new reach and getting new eyeballs, and maybe have reached a point of saturation with a specific audience, or are over optimized, and just introducing more new awareness. Could your business benefit from more people knowing about you? Probably the answer is yes.
Yeah. And it's probably somewhere in between. I mean, we're not going to go back to, the Don Draper days of advertising per se, but it's not going to be like I put $1 in, I can see, every single nuance, approach that comes out of it. Google and kind of online advertising certainly helped to usher in a whole new measurement capability. But to your point, in some ways we kind of over optimized and trying to get so efficient in the advertising, we kind of got away from building brand awareness and how you actually do that in an effective manner and kind of understand that I'm going to allocate a certain amount of, marketing to my advertising overall. And I'm going to look at it kind of holistically. There's not going to be a silver bullet. And a lot of that has been, again, ushered in by GDPR originally, but, increasing regulations overall and consumer backlash from being over-targeted.
Dan, I'd love to get your thoughts on, from a privacy standpoint, one, as a consumer, and two, specifically as marketers, as media sellers, how does data collected for the real world, how does that differ maybe from data that's collected online for the purpose of serving ads?
That's a great question. So historically, right, we were thinking, you would cookie your website, right? And you're dropping breadcrumbs on and trying to understand kind of the journey that people were taking online. And, people who use different operating systems have seen degradation of their user experience because everybody is dropping all these cookies, which means that these pages load a lot slower. So it's been actually a degradation in consumer experience. If you use something that has no cookies on it, you can see how much faster the pages load. So it's been one of these taxes, if you will, in terms of consumer experience. But marketers, obviously want to get the intelligence of, what does Tim like, or somebody like Tim, because they're trying to obviously, do it. And at the end of the day, making content is not cheap. We're going to have to pay for it one way or the other. And ads obviously have been historically a great way of subsidizing the creation of content. When you start thinking about what's been happening in the real world, we carry around these cell phones with us that are great at collecting data. And historically, you were collecting mobile ad IDs. Before that, people were using things like the MAC address until Apple changed things, because it's kind of like whack-a-mole. You create some new way of tracking somebody, and that changes because you really didn't have permission. It's kind of like with, as Voltaire would say, or as younger people might think Spider-Man said it, with great power comes great responsibility. And at the end of the day, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something or that you have the right to do something. And it's ultimately kind of that weighing that balance, if you will. But historically, you would take a mobile ad ID, which, Google has their version, Apple has their version in terms of how to collect this stuff. And then you as a consumer can opt in or opt out of that, depending on which platform you are and depending on what country you're in. Well, those days are becoming more and more murky, very similar to third-party deprecation. Mobile ad IDs are becoming, harder and harder to come by, either because of the OS changes, regulatory changes, or just consumer opt-ins or opt-outs. And so from a placer perspective, this is one of the things that we benefited from, because we never focused on mobile ad IDs. Because again, the roots of our company were really around trying to understand the place. It was really place intelligence, not person intelligence or people intelligence. Because we focus on commercial real estate, we focus on the place, not the person. We never were collecting this information. So we don't have any mobile ad IDs, even though we have our own SDK, a software development kit that sits within dozens of applications, where background location is paramount to the functionality of the app itself. Safety applications, weather applications, financial services applications, insurance discount applications for safe driving, things of that nature. But because we never focused on the person, we actually have software that sits within our app publishing partner server ecosystem that strips out all person identifiable information, known as PII, which many of your audience has probably heard of. But that also doesn't give us the mobile ad ID because we don't want it. We don't need it. We're not building an ad targeting business or a retargeting business. So our business has never been impacted by mobile ad ID deprecation in any way. So if mobile ad IDs went away tomorrow, which tomorrow could be literally tomorrow, but it could be also 6 months or a year from now. But I think the smart money is that mobile ad IDs are going to become more scarce in the ecosystem, not more prevalent. Placer's business is immune to that because we don't have them in our system to begin with.
How does this change? What are the implications maybe the next 3 to 5 years? We talked a little bit last time about Wi-Fi and routers and how some of the technology advancements that are happening in our kind of consumer lives are influencing the next stages of location-based marketing. What's coming?
It's a great question. And much like, we started this with GPS and kind of how GPS exists in our phones and all the new ecosystems that develop because of that. We're starting to see a lot of this in terms of just overall technology advancements, and the cost and the barrier of technology cost coming down allows for more digital screens in the ecosystem. It allows for new capabilities in the ecosystem. Everything from, we've all had, challenges. I'm sure kind of most people understand this. You go into a big building, you open up Google Maps and you get that big blue circle. Like we've all kind of experienced what that is. And that's just because you can't get line of sight to the satellites. And I don't care who you are, we all use the same GPS satellites. But increasingly, there's more technology that's being developed. And again, location-based marketing and location-based analytics will be the beneficiaries of this. Maybe not the reason that it happens, much like GPS on a phone was for 911 reasons. We benefited from that capability. But things like Wi-Fi. So today, I have in my own apartment, you probably have your own house, you have a Wi-Fi router in your house.
Sure.
You have two different channels of that. You have a 2.4 gigahertz spectrum and you have a 5.0 gigahertz spectrum. Why? Because there's more data transmitted in the Wi-Fi spectrum than all other spectrum combined globally. It's massive. Well, Wi-Fi is great for that use because it has a limited range, right? If you go outside, if you go too far away from your house, you lose connectivity to your router, right?
I know right where it is. I can see it. It's the spot right there. Yeah.
Right. If you go about, 10 meters, or for us English people, US people, 30 feet from your house, you're probably going to lose Wi-Fi connection. Why? Because it has a very short range, but it can pack a lot of data on that. So what the FCC is actually doing is they're opening up more spectrum for Wi-Fi routers. Why? Because we're using a lot of devices. We have a lot of devices in our home. You go into a work environment, you have a lot more devices. You're transmitting a lot more data. How can I put more data on that spectrum more efficiently? It's really how do you plug more stuff into the device? So the FCC is opening up more spectrum for Wi-Fi use. Well, when that happens, they have to make sure, because Wi-Fi spectrum is open spectrum. It's the reason why you can go down to Best Buy and you can buy, a router off the shelf. You can go plug it in as long as you have a data connection. Any router will work. Why? Because it's open spectrum. It's
Gets you on the highway of the internet.
Right. It's like going and getting a Garmin or getting a smartwatch. You have access to GPS. You have a data connection. It's open. It's open. Anybody can access it. That's the point of it. Well, with Wi-Fi, again, all spectrum in the United States, they're channeled for certain things. And your phone could pick up certain spectrum. And if you're on T-Mobile, you pick up certain bandwidth. If you're on Verizon, you pick up another bandwidth. Your AM, FM radios, if people kind of remember that, you tune your dial. All that's doing is just changing the wavelength of what that receiver can pick up. That's just the way radio spectrum overall works. Different bandwidths and different frequencies. Same thing happens with this. They just have to make sure nobody else is using it. So for the first time, and this is a long-winded answer, but for the first time, the routers themselves will have to know where they are.
Oh, wow.
In an X and Y, latitude, longitude, and a Z coordinate. X, Y, and Z, the routers will have to know in order to benefit from the use of this new spectrum that the FCC is opening up. So if you think about like a mall, you think about an airport, you think about some of these high traffic areas, think about stadiums where a lot of people are going, and you want to be able to put more data, more capacity for people to use this stuff. For the first time, some of these environments that have been GPS challenged are going to have new capabilities. What that's going to unlock from a marketing perspective, from a consumer experience perspective, will be fairly limitless. And so those are really some of the exciting things that from a retailer, they'll be thinking about, from marketers, they'll be thinking about, from stadium owners and event operators, what are they going to be thinking about just in terms of, as this new bandwidth gets unleashed, what do you do to the consumer experience? What type of advertising and promotion, obviously, you might want to do for that kind of stuff, but just what do you want to do in terms of the overall experience for consumers?
How does that maybe bring this full circle? How will technology advancements like that influence platforms like Placer?
So if you think about this, think about a shopping mall. So right now for GPS or an airport, very similarly, you kind of have an idea of where somebody is. But I don't know if you're in the Bath and Body Works or if you're in the Starbucks right next to it, because GPS and accuracy, you can get down to kind of a small area, but
both.
You really
I went to both.
Yeah. And so you really need to understand, where you are. So as the indoor positioning gets better, trying to understand, are you in the Bath and Body Works or are you in the Starbucks becomes a whole lot more clear. If you're in an airport, are you a gate A31 or A32? I mean, they're right next to each other. And so those types of things will open up new capabilities. Again, from a promotional perspective, from an intelligence perspective, again, if I'm at gate A31, I might be going to Cancun. That's a very different audience than I'm at A32 and I'm going to Boston for a trade show. So understanding that gives marketers, gives intelligence to, again, consumer intelligence platforms and obviously Placer. We're going to help leverage some of those things to provide more insights for the breadth of customers we work with.
Well, consider me subscribed. I'm sure there's a lot of folks listening right now that are just frothing for more. So maybe give them the Latin long. Tell folks where to go to learn more about what Placer's up to, maybe good places to connect with yourself.
Absolutely. So you can find everything you want from Placer at placer.ai. So that's placer.ai. We've had that URL in before the AI craze. So it's always been at the root of who Placer is. But we focus a lot on intelligence and information. So we have a whole Discover series that you can go out and subscribe to and look at and stay up to date with what Placer is doing. My contact information is just dan.hight@placer.ai. So you can reach out to me directly and stay tuned for more exciting news from Placer.
We definitely will. Maybe as the jumping off point, what puts the AI in Placer AI? I can vouch for the fact that you've been AI OGs, but what puts the AI in Placer?
Yeah, I would say that the big part of it is we're trying to ultimately take more intelligence into the platform to make better decisioning just overall. And so part of this starts obviously with the cell phone itself and kind of the intelligence of what that is, but it's also the context of what it is. So again, when you start thinking about the GPS inaccuracies, are you in the parking lot or are you inside the store? Well, at some point in time, you have to make some very educated guesses, but you can do that with very large data sets to ultimately understand some of those things. You can also look at where you have peaks of spike of foot traffic or lows of full traffic or footfall traffic. Some of that was COVID related. Obviously, we saw, everything was fine until March of 2020, and then everything shut down overnight. Well, you can see that. But certain events are going to drive spikes or fall off in traffic. What we're doing right now is trying to give you some intelligence of what may have happened. Was this around a holiday? I mean, again, if you're a marketer in New York, well, what just happened in Dallas on a Tuesday? You might not know that there was a parade. So if we can provide you that intelligence of what may have led to a spike in traffic or fall of traffic, gives you more insights to how you want to leverage that, again, from a retailer perspective or from city planning perspective.
Excellent. Dan, thank you so much for sharing as much as you have. We'll make sure to link to all of the resources to make it easy for everybody in the show notes. And again, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tim.
Absolutely. If you found this to be helpful, please share it with someone who could benefit. As always, make sure to smash that subscribe button. Wherever you're listening, leave the podcast review. That's how you help us grow. And we'll see y'all next time.
It might take a lifetime to know just who you are.
Quarter century, I finally came to my senses. I finally got my hand up on the tinted Benz, kid. I see the world clear through my tinted lenses. With the dream and the drive, the possibilities endless. Now print that, send this all the way to Tokyo. Take a trip down south, down to Mexico. Next stop, Shanghai, the world-class trade show. First class all the way, cause that's how we roll. Yeah, call us the rock star businessman. Rockin' shows, we handle business, man. We got our own future in the palm of our hands, cause divided we fall and together we stand.